Okay, chapter 14. There would be little sleep for the next few nights, in fact. Though the days passed without incident, at night, Johnny's mind would not let go of what he had learned. Even when he did drift off, he would return to his strange, unnerving falling dreams. But now the dream ended with his father turning away and walking off into a mist. Johnny's sleep was so disrupted by the fact that Saturday was coming, and he, Emmy, and Paul, and Steve were supposed to go back to the Granville house that night to investigate the coffin. He hated coffins. At breakfast Saturday morning, Fiona greeted Johnny with the table with a cheery, "Good morning, sleepyhead." Johnny managed a weak smile. If only she knew. Then she said the best thing she could have said. "I'm going right in today," she announced, turning over baking in a frying pan. "Care to join me?" Johnny's heart leapt. Writing was one of the things he enjoyed the most. Fiona taught him when they were in Scotland, commenting on how he seemed born to do it. "That'd be great," he answered. The distraction from a ride would be just the thing to relax him and break him out of his melancholy needling at his spirits. In fact, at that moment, he wouldn't have minded riding as far away from his troubles as the horse would take him. His father walked into the room, sullen. "Has anyone been in my study?" he asked. Johnny's heart fell. He was finding it difficult to look at his father without scowling. Now he tried to look as disinterested as possible, though he was certain his father knew instantly that he was guilty. "John?" Harold asked. Johnny's bottom lip poked out as if he were mulling the question over. "Not me," he said. Fiona dished up the breakfast as Charlie entered the room. No one would be poking around in that gloomy old study of yours," Fiona said. "What it needs is a thorough cleaning." Charlie looked at Johnny. "I know who's been in your study," she said. Johnny glared at her and nodded his head slightly toward Fiona. "Who?" Harold asked. Charlie smiled. "It was Macduff. I saw him go into it last night." Well, I don't suppose he knows the rules," Fiona said. "At least not yet." She sat, and Harold said grace. Oh, Harold said grace. Duh. Come on, Honor. You have a brain. Johnny didn't hear a word of it. He looked up as his father prayed and saw Charlie grinning at him. He wanted to throttle her. Instead, he quickly ate his breakfast, then did his chores and hers. 2 hours later, Johnny sat astride a bay mare in full gallop, Fiona 2 lengths behind him. He suspected she held back so he could win, but that didn't stop him from enjoying the race. After a good workout, they dismounted by the small stream, giving their horses, Toby and Earl, a rest and a cool drink of water. "You're quiet today, John Avery," Fiona said as she stroked Earl's mane. "Everything all right?" Johnny leaned against an elm tree shading the stream. "There's nothing wrong with being quiet, is there?" "Nay. Only sometimes silence is more defeating than a scream, and more isolation than a brick wall." "Everything's fine," he said. which he knew was a lie. Right now, so much of his life felt like a lie, or at least a deception. He couldn't talk about the coffin because he and the other kids would get in trouble for trespassing and being careless. He couldn't talk about the hobo who came into their house because his parents thought he was being prejudiced. He couldn't talk about the journal because his father told him not to. He couldn't talk about what he'd learned about Harold, and he had lied about not being in his father's study. Lies are piling up like firewood, he thought. Come on, lad, Fiona said. You yourself said you've been all tied up in knots lately. Don't try to avoid what the good Lord may be bringing your way. Johnny's brow furrowed. Bringing my way? What do you mean? Fiona rubbed Earl's chin. Sometimes God needs to get us out of our own way. We tangle our lives up so badly that God has to do something to get us untangled. Such as? Oh, could be any number of things. Hard times, good times, wise advice, puzzling circumstance. Think of those people in the Bible that Jesus healed. The only reason they experienced his healing was because they were sick in the first place. So, you mean that God makes us sick so he can heal us? Nah, I wouldn't say that, lad. But God can use anything for good. The important thing to do is to pay attention. Earl whinnied. I believe Earl here is eager for another race. Last one home's a rotten egg, she said, climbing onto the saddle. Johnny mounted his horse, and they had sprinted and had a spirited race back to the stable. As they rode, Fiona's words echoed in his mind. God can use anything for good. He decided to find out if those words were true. Tonight, at Granville House. He would take the healing cloth and try it on Steve. Chapter 15. Johnny scampered over to the porch roof edge, grabbed the trellis, and began climbing down. When his head cleared the porch roof, he glimpsed someone standing in the dark looking at him. He let out a muffled yelp of surprise and literally jumped off the trellis, flying cat-like away from the porch, landing on his feet on the ground below. It was Emmy. What are you doing? She whispered. Johnny's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. What am I doing? He answered. Are you trying to scare me to death? She shook her head. Why are you so jumpy? Who did you think would be standing here? No one. It's midnight. Didn't I tell you I'd come get you at your place? No. You've barely said a word to me since you nearly bit my head off the morning after Halloween. She scowled. I wasn't even sure you'd come tonight after that. They started walking toward Granville House. I'm sorry about that, Johnny said. I shouldn't have taken things out on you. Emmy shrugged. That's all right. I figured something happened. She paused, then added, Did something happen? Yes, he thought. No, he said. Does that mean something did, but you don't want to talk about it? He sighed. Maybe. She nodded. Okay, message received. She looked a little offended, so he said, But thanks for asking. Emmy smiled at him. Then she looked away and asked, Are you still nervous about seeing the coffin again? He wasn't ashamed to admit it. I guess. You? Actually, I'm kind of excited. What do you think we'll find in it? I don't want to think about it, he replied. I just want to do it and get it over with. He took off running, and she followed. The whole way there, Johnny kept pondering how he would use the cloth on Steve and get Steve to agree to do it. He really wanted to do it in private and without getting Steve's hopes up. He decided he'd have to wait and figure out on the spur of the moment. God can use anything for good, Fiona had said. The cloth had worked on Macduff, or so it seemed. He supposed that could have been his imagination playing tricks on him. He would find out tonight, one way or another. Johnny saw Paul standing in front of the gates to the house, alone. Where's Steve? Johnny asked. Mom took him to the hospital in Burham, Paul replied. What? What happened? Is he okay? Emmy exclaimed. He wasn't hurt when he fell through the floor, was he? Paul shook his head. I don't think so. He just gets sick like this. He has to go to the hospital a lot, he said. He sighed sadly. One of these times, he's not going to come home. Emmy hugged him. I'm so sorry, Paul, she said. Johnny stood back. He remembered the smell of death when his mother and grandfather died. He could make out the same odor tonight. I'm not going in there, Paul said, pointing to the Granville house. I just came to tell you. I'd better get back before my dad finds out. He never sleeps when Steve gets sick. Look down. When Steve gets sick. Paul walked away, shoulders sagging, as though they carried the weight of the world. Johnny and Emmy exclaimed glances. What do you want to do? He asked. Cry? Emmy said. But we're here. We should check it out. As they walked up to the gate, Johnny saw another symbol, this one freshly carved into the gatepost. It looked like a hat with an arrow pointing off the brim. What do you suppose that means? Emmy whispered. Something about a pointed brim hat, I guess, Johnny answered. They walked through the gate and up to the front door. It was cracked open, so they slowly pushed it wide, enough to sneak in. They walked across the weathered floorboards into the adjacent room, where they had all fallen in. Stopping at the precipice of the hole, Johnny wished he had never seen this coffin. He knew his fear of it was irrational. His grandpa Jackson used to say that you only fear what you don't know. In this case, Johnny decided he would rather not know anyway. Still, in order to save face, he couldn't turn back now. He steeled himself against his fear and gingerly climbed down into the crawl space, helping Emmy after him. He turned on his flashlight, got on his hands and knees, gritted his teeth, and crawled over to the coffin. Emmy followed. Through the yellow light, Johnny could see the coffin was quite old. The wood had warped over time, and the winding trails chewed by termites along the length of the boards gave it a look of an antique road map through hilly terrain. On the lid were drawn what seemed to be patterns familiar to those that might be found on a quilt. He looked them over carefully, committing the shapes to memory. Emmy crouched beside the coffin, looking as though she were about to be sick. "Are you okay?" Johnny asked, hoping she didn't ask him the same question. "You'll know when we open the lid." "You'll know when we open the lid if a body's inside. I can't promise anything." I can't tell if that's Emmy or him talking. I think it's supposed to be Emmy. "You'll know when we open the lid. If a body's inside, I can't promise anything." They were poised to lift the lid when they heard voices from the front door. "Did you leave this open?" the first voice asked. It was a man's voice. "Yeah, probably," the second voice answered. Also a man's. "Sorry about that, boss." Johnny quick turned off his flashlight and motioned for Emmy to crawl back under the floor and away from the opening. They scurried backward, feeling their way through the darkness. The men headed straight for them. Within seconds, their footsteps were immediately above Johnny and Emmy, moving toward the hole. They stopped, turned a flashlight on, and shone it into the opening. The first voice spoke again. Johnny instantly recognized the voice this time. It was Professor Mangle. "When did it happen?" Mangle asked, clearly irritated. "Some kids came in on Halloween," the second man said. His voice sounded familiar, too. Johnny thought, but he couldn't quite place it. "I was all the way upstairs," the second man continued. "One of the boys was coming up when the crash happened. He ran back down, luckily for us. Lucky for him," Mangle said. The second man coughed hoarsely. "Anyway, they all ran off a few minutes later. I hope they didn't look inside." "I don't think they had time. They were too spooked by the coffin. They skedaddled out of here like it was a fire drill," he said. "I mean, as fast as they could, pushing a wheelchair and all." Mangle's voice changed, more curious now. "Wheelchair? One of them was in a wheelchair?" "Yeah, I reckon that's why they broke through. That trapdoor wasn't meant to hold any weight." Mangle muttered. "And son, I told those boys to stay out of here. The last thing I need is for them to find out about this." "I'm sure they didn't see nothing." "And what if they did? They couldn't connect it to you." "Make sure it stays that way," Mangle commanded. "You moved her out of here? Out of Ja?" "Sha. Shashang. Though, I gotta be honest, I'm tired of doing it. It's hard work moving her without anyone seeing. Some boy almost stumbled on her in the forest a few days back. That's why I moved her here." "Well, choose a better place, man," Mangle snapped. Ain't no one gonna find her here. Ain't no one gonna find her now. They will never find her, he snorted. Besides, even if they did, old Rika, she can't exactly give us away now, can she? He let out an odd, shrilling laugh. Mangle grunted and walked away. The other man shrilled again and then followed Mangle across the floor and up the stairs, muttering as he went. Johnny motioned for Emmy to stay still. He wanted to be certain Mangle and his accomplice were gone. Thoughts raced through his mind. Professor Mangle did unnerve him, but the idea that he could be involved in murder seemed unbelievable. Still, he heard what they said about Rikea. The note. That name was on the note the boy had slipped him on the night Rikea would have to be moved. And tonight the man with Mangle said he had to move her again. He wondered if... Yes! He suddenly remembered where he'd heard that shrilling laugh before. He heard it from the hobo who came to his house on Halloween. The man spoke of the note. The man who saw him down by the river. The coast seemed clear, so Johnny nudged Emmy, and they both crawled back toward the opening in the floor. He was about to jump out of the hole when he heard something move. He turned on his flashlight in time to witness a chilling sight. The lid on the coffin was rising. Then, to his shock and horror, a skeletal hand emerged. It reached down and wrote something in the dirt. Johnny pointed his flashlight so he could read it. Help him, the light revealed. Johnny scarcely breathed. He sat rigid, unable to move. Then he felt something on his arm. Soft at first, then gripping tighter and tighter. He tried crying out, but no sounds came from his mouth. Finally, the hand began to shake him, and his flashlight fell to the ground, breaking the bulb. It was pitch dark again. Just him. And the thing in the coffin. Then a voice moaned low and mournful. Jean. It suddenly penetrated the darkness into his thoughts. Johnny! It was Emmy. She grabbed the flashlight out of his hand. How did you get back here? He wondered. She turned it on, illuminating the crawl space as well as her panicked face. What are you doing? She asked. They're gone. Yeah. Upstairs. He answered, confused. No. Gone. They just walked out from the front door. She studied him for a moment. Are you all right? You're not having a stroke, are you? Did you see that? He blurted out. See what? What are you talking about? He pointed to the place in the dirt where the hand scratched out the message. That, right there. The writing was gone. Johnny crawled over to the coffin. The dirt beside it was untouched. Safe for the handprints he and Emmy had tracked into it. The lid sat firmly atop the coffin, unmoved. Perplexed, Johnny screwed up His courage grabbed the lid and wrenched it open. Emmy covered her eyes and gasped. It was empty. Just a dirty silk lining. And the single boot sticking out through the broken end. Whoever Rukia was, she had indeed been moved to another resting place. And Johnny intended to find it. Chapter 17. Monday morning, Johnny and Emmy walked the long walk to school. Fall was making way for winter, with light swirls of snow wafting down and covering the dormant brown sod. The thin white blanket gave a sheen of wonder to the world that had grown darker to Johnny over the past few weeks. They used their trip to brainstorm what they would do in light of everything that happened Saturday night. We need to know what we don't know, said Johnny. Like who Rukia was. Emmy interrupted. Was. He agreed. I tried to tell Fiona this morning that it isn't safe to open our house to every person who knocks on the door. She just laughed and said I have a very active imagination and that people who have enough courage to ask for help should be welcome anytime. Emmy grimaced. Unless that person has been moving dead bodies around, she sighed. So, how do you propose we find out more about this Rukia person? Meet me after school at the custodial closet, he said. That afternoon, Ben listened patiently as Johnny and Emmy told him everything that had happened at Granville House. He nodded occasionally and raised his right and left eyebrows independently. When prompted by an unexpected twist in the narrative, the only part Johnny left out was the skeletal handwriting in the dirt. He wasn't about to tell everyone that yet. At least not yet. He'd never experienced anything like it before. More than likely, it was what Fiona had said. He had an active imagination. At least that's what he kept telling himself. When Johnny and Emmy had finished their story, Ben stroked his chin, scratching the gray whiskers. That's quite a tale, he said. He cocked his head and peered at Johnny. You always raised Cain like this, boy? You ain't been in town but a shake or two and already got a couple of full-blown adventures under your belt. My stepmother says I have a gift. Johnny grunted. Smart woman, Ben agreed. So what do you think we should do? Ben leaned back in his chair, considering them both for a moment, took a deep breath, and said, Nothing. Johnny and Emmy looked at each other with equal measures of astonishment and disappointment. Nothing? Emmy exclaimed. Nothing at all? Unless Johnny wants to help me finish a project I've been working on. Ben rose, walked to the back of the room, and pushed out a small metal frame wheelchair with a car battery sitting in a cradle behind it. I'm making this for Steve. Ran into his mama today. She says he should be coming home in a few weeks. I'm trying to figure out how to power it electrically. That way he can get around when he wants without someone pushing him along.